Good evening. My name is Richard Heidemann, and I'm honored to be the host of this evening's Kristallnacht program, Let There Be Light, stories of hope and humanity to illuminate the darkness. This broadcast is presented by the International March of the Living and the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience at Rutgers University, in cooperation with the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and the USC Shoah Foundation. On November 9th, 1938, the night of broken glass, the world was shocked to see the savage intentions of Hitler and the Nazis. Kristallnacht turned out to be a grim foreshadowing of what was to happen to European Jewry. Over 7,000 Jewish-owned stores and synagogues were ransacked, and scores of Jews were murdered. Over 30,000 German Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. By the end of World War II, an estimated 6 million Jews and millions of other innocent victims, children, women, and men from all across Europe, lost their lives at the hands of the Nazis. Tonight, we shift our focus from the atrocities of Nazi Germany to the moral courage of those who resist tyranny. As we remember the events of Kristallnacht 1938, we also honor the moral heroism and valor of those who resisted evil. This commemoration is part of a larger campaign that was launched last year and has been expanded by the International March of the Living, called Let There Be Light, in which the world was invited to keep their lights on during the night of November 9th as a symbol of solidarity and mutual commitment in the shared battle against anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, bigotry, and intolerance. Against the backdrop of rising anti-Semitism today, racism, and amidst the shadow of the coronavirus, these expressions of optimism and unity illuminate the world against darkness and hatred. On behalf of the March of the Living and its partners, we thank you for joining us. We begin tonight's program with stories of heroism and courage shown by both Jews and their non-Jewish neighbors in the face of Nazi terror. Our opening material is from the USC Shoah Foundation's collection of Holocaust survivor testimonies, focusing on the events of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Following this, we are pleased to feature the premiere of a short film highlighting the heroism of one German woman on Kristallnacht.
My birthday is November 15th, and my bar mitzvah was calculated a couple days. We go according to the Torah, so it came out the 15th was not exactly on a Saturday, so the Saturday after the 15th would be my bar mitzvah. On November 9th, 1938, in the morning, all of a sudden, we went out to school and we saw smoke and fire. And temples in Berlin, they started like a pogrom. They started to breaking the windows. There were a lot of Jewish stores. They broke the windows from the stores and they took out the merchandise. They brought big picket signs, "Don't buy from the Jews," and they started burning the synagogues. And so we went back to the house. We did not go to school. We stayed home, and my parents sent out my brother, who looks really like a German. He's blonde hair and blue eyes, and he went out in the street to see what's going on. Came back and told us that mostly all the stores what belongs to Jews are broken, the windows and the merchandise was pulled out. People are walking in and out from the stores like It was their own. And the temples were burnt, and the Torah and everything. And here, a week later, this was November 9th, and a week later, I'm supposed to have my bar mitzvah. So the family, everybody knew was invited to the temple to come. And so we didn't know what to do. It calmed down a couple days later. And the week afterward, we notified our family that we will make the bar mitzvah. We cannot make it in the temple because the temple was burned down and broken. There was a little house in the back from the gabbai, the person who takes care of the temple. He says, you can do it in my house, tell your family to come. And the rabbi, who was already prepared for my bar mitzvah, who knew that I will have it, was ready for it. We came Saturday morning to this place. We had about 3-4 people standing outside watching if they see any police or SS or Nazis coming to warn us so that we can escape from behind in the backyard. So I did to describe the temple. It was a room. In one corner were the burnt Torah scrolls. They were laying on the floor. I'm sorry. They were laying on the floor, covered. I did my bracha, and I did what I have to do for my bar mitzvah. The rabbi was standing, crying, told me never to forget. This was supposed to be my happiest day. Anyway, the rabbi told me when he made the bracha, he said, remember, never forget. Never. Okay. This was my bar mitzvah, 1938.
After the Second World War, Germany attempted to bury its past. Public discussion about the atrocities committed by Hitler's Nazi regime were carefully avoided. In the 1980s, 50 years after the war ended, German cities invited back Jewish citizens who had fled or were expelled from the country in the 1930s. The visits were one way Germany began honestly reckoning with its past. My father, Alfred Altmann, was born in 1921 in Dusseldorf, Germany. Johanna, my father's mother, was a seamstress. She owned a successful dress shop in Düsseldorf's Königsallee fashion district. My father, an only child, lived above the shop with his parents. He escaped from Germany in 1939 to England. He never saw his beloved parents, David and Johanna, again. My dad made his first trip back to Germany in 45 years. A highlight of his trip was a visit to his primary public school, where he had been asked to speak. He took them through what had been a typical day for him when he would have been their age. Reconnecting with memories of his youth began his journey of healing from his painful past. A few years after my father's initial visit to Germany, the organizers of the event called him with urgency. They told my father about an elderly German woman who had come running in calling out, "Altmans, the Altman family, are they here?" She was waving in her hand an article about the return of Jews to Düsseldorf. She appeared desperate to find my father and had been searching for him for 50 years. Her name was Marta, and she said she had worked for my father's mother. She was not someone he had been close to, but he remembered her. August 1990, my brother Dave and I arrived in Düsseldorf, Germany to meet Marta. The door opened, and we saw an elderly woman sitting in a chair. It was one small room with a kitchenette, sofa, a table, and an alcove for her bed. She took one look at me, her eyes filled with tears. Johanna, for I looked exactly like my grandmother. Her story begins on the night of November 9th, 1938, the infamous night known today as Kristallnacht. She had been working in the house with my grandmother when my father and his father heard their beloved synagogue was burning. The two immediately ran out to the street to see what was happening. Soon after the men left the house, the brown shirts arrived. Marta described the horror and destruction they committed. These two women, seamstress and assistant, Jew and Gentile, lived and survived terror together. The synagogue had burned to the ground that night, but the men's absence from the apartment at that time had probably spared them from deportation. Once the soldiers were gone, Marta summoned her husband to help her gather from the street whatever was salvageable of their possessions. She and her husband carried mattresses and furniture to their second-floor apartment. It was astounding to hear how she matter-of-factly undertook these heroic steps at great personal risk to herself and her husband. Once a week, she would meet in a park. My grandfather would arrive with an empty suitcase, and Marta a suitcase filled with whatever food she could scrounge from her job at a farm. They would sit on a park bench and transfer the suitcases. Where the key class was would be notes usually marking the place they would meet next. Marta stood up from her chair and began to go to nooks and crannies in her tiny apartment, bringing out items. Look here, she pointed. See that on the painting? It is the mark from the Nazi's heel where he stomped on it. I understood that this woman had put herself and her family at risk, not once, but many, many times for my family. I tried to find the words of my gratitude. She looked at me straight in the eye and said, "I did it because it was the right thing to do, and my daughter would do the same today." Marta did not have a life of riches, but her heart and actions were a treasure chest. She was the epitome of a righteous Gentile. She is a reminder to us that even in the darkest times, there are those who resist evil. She is a role model to me And to all of us who seek to build a better world, her light continues to shine and inspires me every day.
Many of our participants, educators, volunteers, and supporters have been directly affected by the Holocaust. They are often the children or grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, both of those who survived and also of those who perished in the Shoah. We welcome Mark Moskowitz, a son of a Holocaust survivor and a supporter and board member of the International March of the Living.
I am deeply honored that March of the Living has invited me to support this evening's program, Let There Be Light, Stories of Hope and Humanity to Illuminate the Darkness. Tonight, we pay tribute to those who, during the Holocaust and other times of great peril to humanity, courageously stood up against evil. In stark contrast to the darkness around them, they honored the image of God planted inside each one of us through their noble actions. The theme of this evening's Kristallnacht memorial is in keeping with the spirit of my late father of blessed memory, Henry Moskowitz. He was a Holocaust survivor from Kielce, Poland, who lost his first wife and daughter, parents, brother, and most of his family in the Holocaust. He experienced human nature at its worst, and he had every reason to feel defeated, angry, bitter. Yet, he was none of those things. When he came to the United States after the war, he sought to build a new life and not to retreat, despite his tragic past. He was always able to see the upside of things, always able to find hope and faith, and see the positive in life when many others did not. His philanthropy reflected his values, supporting organizations dedicated to Holocaust memory like Yad Vashem, the USC Shoah Foundation, and Givat Chaviva. The focus was not only on remembering the Holocaust, but what lessons can be learned from this unprecedented event so that society will never tread down that same terrifying path again. Perhaps my father's values are exemplified best by the words of another Holocaust survivor, Roman Kent. "It is our mutual obligation," he said, "that of survivors and national leaders, to instill in the current and future generations the understanding of what happens when virulent prejudice and hatred are allowed to flourish. We must all teach our children tolerance and understanding at home and in school. For tolerance cannot be assumed, it must be taught. And we must make it clear that hate is never right and love is never wrong." As we mark the tragic legacy of Kristallnacht, I can think of no better words with which to reflect upon than these. Hate is never right and love is never wrong. It is with these words that we truly honor the memory of our millions of martyred ancestors, and we best pay tribute to the example of those noble souls who try to help, who call upon us every day to follow in their courageous footsteps.
Tonight, we are honoring heroes of moral courage, those who resisted the Nazis and also stood up at other times during periods of great peril to humanity. Ani Jajurian is a Broadway actress and singer. She's a passionate Armenian activist whose own family members were murdered in the Armenian genocide. The powerful stories of survival from each generation of her family inspire Ani to stay true to her Armenian roots and to contribute to a brighter future for all people. The song you are about to hear was written by Ani, specifically for this evening's program.
Barkev ashcharin, barkev martgutian. Luisi, huisi, champan bernat. Manganti tag noch in de gurgat. Luisi, huisi, champan bernat. Manganti tag noch in de gurgat. Arev toch shura mira bagain. Arev toch shura mira bagain. Ach, pailume, 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 huises pailum. Arev toch shora, charash charin. Ach, pailume, 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 huises pailum. Arev toch shora, charash charin.
Professor John J. Farmer, Jr. is the director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University and the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience within the Institute. John is an esteemed lawyer and dear friend of the International March of the Living. A former Attorney General of New Jersey, he brings to us his experience, his insight, and his commitment to seeking justice.
Thank you and good evening. To the layperson, and even to some of its victims, the wave of arsons, assaults, arrests, and murders unleashed on November 9, 1938, on the so-called Kristallnacht, may have seemed an unplanned, spontaneous eruption of outrage at the murder of a Nazi official in Paris. Synagogues, shops, homes were vandalized and burned in the thousands. Over 90 Jews were murdered, countless others beaten. 20,000 Jews were seized and sent to the concentration camps at Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen. Several hundred died at the hands of the guards. It may have appeared spontaneous, chaotic, and unplanned, but it was anything but. What was easy to miss in the apparent chaos and violence was the careful underlying planning lurking just beneath that fiery surface. Earlier that day, orders were issued to the German police and fire brigades by Reinhard Heydrich that spelled out in specific detail the rules of engagement for the police and fire departments throughout Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland. These orders read, in relevant part, quote, because of the assassination of Legation Secretary von Rath in Paris, demonstrations throughout the Reich are to be expected tonight, November 8, 9 to 10, 1938. A, only such actions may be carried out which do not threaten German lives or property, for example, the burning of synagogues, only when there is no threat of fire to the surroundings. Stores and residences of Jews may only be destroyed, but not looted. The police are instructed to supervise compliance with this order and to arrest looters. Special care is to be taken on commercial streets that non-Jewish businesses are completely secured against any damage. Foreign citizens, even if they are Jewish, may not be molested. Demonstrations in progress should not be prevented by the police, but only supervised for compliance with these guidelines. Existing archival material is to be impounded by the police in all synagogues and offices of the Jewish community centers to prevent its destruction in the course of the demonstrations. As soon as the course of events during this night allows the assigned police officers to be used for this purpose, as many Jews, particularly affluent Jews, are to be arrested in all districts as can be accommodated in existing detention facilities. For the time being, only healthy male Jews whose age is not too advanced are to be arrested. Immediately after the arrests have been carried out, the appropriate concentration camps should be contacted to place the Jews into camps as quickly as possible. Special care should be taken that Jews arrested on the basis of this instruction are not mistreated. The chief of the order police has issued the corresponding instructions to the order police, including the fire brigades. Close coordination is to be maintained between the security police and the order police during the implementation of the ordered actions. Signed, Reinhard Heydrich. These orders were followed meticulously. In Frankfurt, for instance, the commander of the 50th Brigade passed on the order, noting that, quote, all the Jewish synagogues within the 50th Brigade are to be blown up or set on fire immediately. Neighboring houses occupied by Aryans are not to be damaged. The action is to be carried out in civilian clothes. Rioting and plundering are to be prevented. The execution of the order began at once, close quote. This after-action report then lists no fewer than 35 synagogues or other Jewish facilities that were either blown up, destroyed by fire, or otherwise vandalized. And that's just in the Frankfurt area. Kristallnacht was the event that brought to light the naked vulnerability of the Jewish population. Having already been stripped of the attributes of legal personhood by the Nuremberg laws and other measures, Kristallnacht signaled the abandonment of the Jewish population by the very institutions of civil society responsible for protecting the public from criminal acts and providing safety from fire. In fact, the police and fire services were conscripted to aid in the destruction. Kristallnacht was the event in which hatred migrated permanently across the blood barrier of extremism and became open and state-sponsored violence. As David Frum has put it, quote, through the end of 1937, it remained possible to hope that the Nazi persecution might still respect some last limits of humanity. Surely in an advanced and cultured nation, some decency must still constrain uttermost barbarity, close quote. On Kristallnacht, the last of those illusions was smashed like broken glass. The protection of vulnerable populations is the purpose of the Miller Center at Rutgers. We have worked with communities as diverse as the Muslim population in Brussels, Belgium, and the Jewish community in Whitefish, Montana, the African American community in Louisiana and Mississippi, and the Sikh community in Wisconsin. We have also authored reports exposing the emergence of militia groups like the Boogaloo Boys and predicting their potential for violence, the rise in anti-Asian hatred in the wake of the pandemic, the emergence of extreme leftist violence, the insidious propagation of QAnon conspiracy theories, a report on the new face of anti-Semitism emerging on social media, a report on the social media incitement that occurred in the days leading up to the January 6th assault on our nation's capital, and a report on the role of extremist social media sites in promoting vaccine hesitancy through misinformation. Our research has disclosed that some events, which appear spontaneous eruptions when covered as they occurred, were in reality, like Kristallnacht, more closely coordinated by at least some of the participants than they appeared to be. Furthermore, our research has brought home how much attention in the social media extremist world has been focused on the police as targets of both recruitment to extremist views and scapegoats of extremist violence. Just as Kristallnacht and what followed resulted from intensely controlled and intensifying messaging of hateful propaganda, so the extremism of today is a product of a social media environment that has monetized ideology, that reinforces every form of prejudice, that converts general proclivities into fixed convictions. And our work has shown that when the messaging of hate reaches a peak of intensity, violence erupts. Buildings are torched, property is destroyed, people are injured, people die. The only answer to such heat is light. The light of truth, the light that exiles hate into outer darkness, the truth that shames every form of hate. That light is what today's program is about. On behalf of the Miller Center, I want to thank our partners at the International March of Living for inviting us to co-sponsor this important commemoration.
Erwin Kotler is the founder and chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and Canada's special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. A former Canadian justice minister, he is one of the world's foremost human rights activists and very close with the March of the Living. He will now share his remarks about the significance of this evening's commemoration.
I've always thought of the term Kristallnacht as being a misnomer, a sanitizer, in effect covering up the horrors that took us down the road to the Holocaust, the assaults on Jews and Jewish institutions, the torching of synagogues, the burning of books, the mass roundups, the killings, the deportations, and perhaps, worst of all, the silence, the indifference, the complicity. What makes Kristallnacht and the Holocaust that followed so unspeakable are not only the horrors of Kristallnacht and the specific horrors of the Holocaust. What makes them so unspeakable is that they were preventable. Nobody could say, we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. Fortunately, there are lodestars in our history, lodestars who stood up to evil, who are torchbearers amidst the darkness, who showed how one person can make a difference. There is Raoul Wallenberg, Canada's first honorary citizen, a hero of the Holocaust, who showed how one person with the compassion to care and the courage to act can confront evil, resist, and prevail. It's not that well known, though it deserves to be, that between mid-May and the beginning of July 1944, 400,000 Jews were deported to the death camp in Auschwitz, the most brutal, the cruelest, most efficient killing field in all of the Holocaust. Raoul Wallenberg arrived as a Swedish diplomat in the Swedish legation in Budapest in mid-July 1944. And together with other diplomats and those whom he mobilized with a combination of bluff and bravado, courage and commitment, Wallenberg and those working with him managed to save 100,000 Jews. So what the bystander international community did not do, one person with integrity showed how one could make a difference. And then there is Nobel Peace Laureate and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, my mentor, teacher, colleague, friend, and soulmate for 50 years, the conscience of humanity, who would remind us again and again of the dangers of indifference and inaction in the face of evil, of the imperative of remembrance, of the imperative of action. And there's Nelson Mandela, Canada's second honorary citizen, who endured 27 years in a South African prison and emerged to not only preside over the dismantling of apartheid, but in fact to become the first president of a free, democratic, egalitarian South Africa, and who would always speak of, as he shared with me, the importance of education to combat racism, hate, and anti-Semitism. And there is Natan Sharansky, a hero of the struggle for Soviet Jewry, indeed a hero of the struggle for human rights in the former Soviet Union, who demonstrated here too how one person can confront evil and prevail, and who inspired the song "Kvutzak Tanat Shanat Olam," that a small group can transform the universe. And there is finally Nasrin Sotoudeh, the iconic Iranian woman human rights lawyer, who embodies the struggle not only for human rights in Iran, but the struggle for human rights globally, whose persecution and prosecution is an attempt to suppress the struggle for human rights, but who has emerged as the embodiment of what resistance and courage is all about. And in that context, let us remember the courageous men and women in the camps and in the ghettos, in the neighborhoods and in the forests, those who stood up, the partisans and others, and who confronted evil and indeed prevailed with their courage. They have taught us by their own engagement the dangers of indifference and inaction, of the imperative to act and to resist evil. And so may this Kristallnacht not only be a day of remembrance, which it is, but may it be a day of remembrance to act, which it must be, on behalf of our common humanity.
Natan Sharansky is one of the most recognizable Jewish heroes of our era. a refusenik in the Soviet Union during the 1970s and 80s, he spent almost a decade in Soviet prisons before being allowed to move to Israel, to Eretz Yisrael, where he continues to be an outspoken advocate for human rights. Natan is currently the chair of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy and the Babi Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. He will present a special award to Paul Miller, founder of the Miller Center for Community Protection and Resilience at Rutgers University, and an important partner with the March of the Living in standing against anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial.
Kristallnacht was kind of introduction to Holocaust. And it should always remind us how easily the most free, advanced societies can turn into the source of evil, death, destruction, as a result of racial hatred and anti-Semitism. And today, when anti-Semitism is on the rise again, it is very important to remember the lessons of Holocaust. That's why the work of the organization like March of Living, which educates tens and hundreds of thousands of young people about Holocaust, is so important. I can tell from my experience of my daughters how important it was for them. And it is important to remember that fighting anti-Semitism, it's not only a Jewish problem. It starts from Jews, it never finishes with Jews. So it is very important that many non-Jews, many non-Jewish organizations are part of this struggle. When I was in prison, I was arrested by the most powerful dictatorship in the world. And I was told that there is no hope, that I will never get out alive. I was always optimistic. Why? Because I knew that Jews of the United States, Jews of the world, together with Israel, never will stop fighting for my release, for the freedom of Soviet Jews. And I knew that we have many allies in this struggle, that the leaders of the free world in the end are on our side, and they will fight, and they will lead us in this struggle. And that's exactly my source of optimism today. When I look how many important initiatives and organizations are uniting their effort in combating anti-Semitism. Paul Miller is fighter against anti-Semitism and great believer in Tikkun Olam. Recognizing the danger of rising anti-Semitism in Europe and America, he founded the Paul Miller Center in Rutgers University to fight against anti-Semitism and for tolerance. The aim of Miller Center is to strengthen Jewish communities, to make them more safe, and to enhance their standing in the society. As the chair of ISGAP, the Institute for Study Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, I fully appreciate the importance of work of Paul Miller and his center. ISGAP is fighting all types of anti-Semitism in academy and in other institutions. And we know how difficult is this struggle and how much effort it needs. Paul Miller's new approach to fight anti-Semitism and hatred, and his partnership with the March of Living is the reason why we, March of Living, decided to give the special award, Hanukkah, the symbol of the victory of light over the darkness, to Paul today. International March of the Living honors Paul Miller on Kristallnacht 2021 for his extraordinary efforts in advocating for human rights and protecting human dignity.
I'm not sure how to begin, so let me start with two thank yous. First, to the March of the Living for this great honor. And second, and critically important, to Natan Sharansky, a man who is known worldwide as someone who has dedicated his entire life to fighting anti-Semitism and all forms of discrimination, for presenting this great honor. I know this Hanukkah menorah bears my name, but it truly should bear the names of the fellows, students, advisors, and everyone who has worked on behalf of the Center to make whatever contribution we have made in the global fight against anti-Semitism, racism, and all forms of discrimination and acts of terror against communities of faith possible. And on the top of the ladder stands the Center's Executive Director, John Farmer, without whose vision, guidance, and hands-on direction, the Center would not be where it is today, nor would it have been able to accomplish whatever we have been able to accomplish over the past 6 or 7 years. I also want to take this opportunity to say that it is not just me who should be here tonight. It should rather be our entire family, starting with my wife Carol, who has stood with me and taken every step I have taken over the many years we have supported and defended our people in the fight against anti-Semitism, as well as in opposition to racism and all forms of discrimination. And in addition to my wife, our children, and I'm thrilled to say grandchildren as well. All of our efforts in support of the Center have been taken through our Family Foundation, where our children not only serve on the board of directors, but are senior officers. This has been done because we realize the fight against discrimination has been waged for generations, and I'm sad to acknowledge will continue long after my generation can no longer carry on the battle. The words of Daniel Jonah Goldhagen in his book, The Devil That Never Dies, are as true today as when he penned them many years ago. The devil, after a period of relative quiescence, has reappeared, flexes his muscles again, and stalks the world with ever more confidence, power, and followers. The devil is not a he, but an it. The devil is anti-Semitism. If there was any question at all about the state of anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, and other forms of discrimination and terrorism against faith communities today, globally, one has to look no further than what is happening in Europe and, regrettably, right here in the United States. Right-wing extremism and the rise of neo-Nazis is taking place in many European countries, including Poland, the very site of the extermination camps Auschwitz and Birkenau, where each year the International March to Living leads thousands in a march to make sure the world never forgets the Holocaust and that the words "never again" will mean never again. Yet it is this country's government that has been trying to enact laws that would exonerate the Polish nation from all forms of complicity in the horrors of the Holocaust, despite the reality that such acts occurred. But we do not have to look beyond our own national borders to see the evidence of Goldhagen's prophecy. The massacre of Jewish worshippers in a Pittsburgh synagogue, the discrimination against blacks in many parts of our nation continues, despite having ended our history of slavery approximately 200 years ago, discrimination that was blatantly shown by the use of troops to break up a peaceful demonstration in our nation's capital. The marches and threats against a rabbi and her children by right-wing extremists in Montana, the banning of Muslim immigration into our country, the support of the neo-Nazi marchers in Charlottesville with the words from our then president that there are good people on both sides. And if anything could chill one to the bone, it is the intent of the government of Texas to require educators to teach children that there is another side to the horror of the Holocaust. There is no other side to the murder by the Nazis of 6 million Jews and millions of others. We should all be thankful that General Eisenhower had the foresight to tell the troops, "Film it all," as the concentration camps were being liberated at the end of World War II, so that no one will ever be able to question the horror that actually happened. The March has chosen a Hanukkah lamp for this honor on this Kristallnacht remembrance. Illumination is a perfect way to show the world the horror of this night about 80 years ago, which ushered in the Holocaust. Saying this brings to mind the words of the song "Light Our Candle" by Peter Yarrow, written almost 40 years ago. What is the memory that's valued so highly that we keep it alive in that flame? What's the commitment to those who have died that we cry out, they've not died in vain? We have come this far always believing that justice would somehow prevail. This is the burden. This is the promise. This is why we will not fail.
The International March of the Living is honored and appreciative to have the support of Facebook in promoting tonight's program, Let There Be Light. Please listen to a special message from a very special person, Sheryl Sandberg, Chief Operating Officer of Facebook, who shares with us what Facebook is doing in its important ongoing commitment to combat racism, anti-Semitism, and hateful speech online.
This is deeply personal to me. Anti-Semitism is the reason my family fled Tsarist Russia and sought shelter in the United States so many generations ago. But sadly, even though all of those generations have passed, anti-Semitism is still very much alive in the US and around the world. It is unacceptable in the 21st century for someone who's Jewish to be afraid to walk into a synagogue, afraid to wear a kippah, afraid to wear a Star of David necklace in public. But all around the world, many Jews are living and worshiping in fear every day. They're fearing abuse, they're fearing violence, they're fearing threats, and none of this is acceptable. There's also that subtle nagging fear that we're not welcome, that you're being judged, that your loyalty to your country or your community is put into question. At Facebook, we stand against hate of all kinds. We are working with governments and NGOs to fulfill the promise of never again. We partner with organizations around the world to promote awareness of anti-Semitism, give a voice to Holocaust survivors, and encourage Holocaust remembrance and education. Initiatives like the March of the Living's Let There Be Light in commemoration of Kristallnacht, which encourages individuals, institutions, and houses of worship across the world to keep their lights on during the night of November 9th. We know that on any platform of our size, our job is to minimize the bad and maximize the good. It is a fight we work on every single day, and we will continue. In Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, Rabbi Tarfon taught us, you're not obliged to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. We will not desist and we will not stand down.
Malcolm Hoenlein is the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. As I've so often said, when Malcolm Hoenlein speaks, the world listens. Recently, he has done pioneering work on the Abraham Accords, an American-led initiative which seeks to create peaceful relations between Israel and her Arab neighbors.
As we approach the anniversary of Kristallnacht, of Pogromnacht, November 9th, 1938, it is a time each year for reflection, both upon what occurred and what we learned from the events of those horrible days leading up to the ultimate attempt at the final solution of eradicating the Jewish people. We know that many people were arrested, that people died, but they put this name of Kristallnacht to neutralize it, and they also put out false figures to minimize it. Thanks to the research of Beit Ashkenaz, in which I was privileged to participate and led to the publication of our 2-volume study of all of the communities in which attacks on synagogues took place, just in those areas under Nazi control that night. It was the beginning of the end, but it was also the end of the early stage that began with words of hate that led to deeds of hate that were promulgated and by the government and by official agencies, by the Nazi Party, and eventually gained acceptance amongst broader and broader segments of the German people who could then stand by while synagogues were destroyed in their own communities, while they saw their neighbors of decades, even centuries, being removed and ultimately being sent to concentration camps and annihilation. So we look back in order to look forward. We look back to those days to understand what we learned from it, what we do to prevent future generations from having to suffer those trials and tribulations. But frankly, it's not for the Jewish community alone, and perhaps even primarily, it is for the non-Jewish world, for them to learn, to take responsibility. I sat with the head of the World Muslim League and a number of survivors, Sheikh Muhammad al-Isa, and very interestingly, he had requested the meeting and told them, I want to hear your stories, but I also want to know what are the lessons we learned from it that we must apply today. And so this annual commemoration is not just to dwell on the tsaras and the tragedies of the past, but to learn from it as we meet the challenges of today. The Abraham Accords, whose anniversary we celebrated recently, was a monumental change in many ways, but it was the culmination of many years of efforts. As we researched the book on Kristallnacht, Pogromnacht, we found the records of the Jews who were saved in Muslim countries. And I started to look into it and saw how Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, in Samarkand and Bukhara, saved hundreds of thousands of Jewish lives. They were obviously under Soviet control at the time, but they were welcomed. Situations weren't always easy or good, but because of it, these Jews were saved. And little recognition was paid to it, nor to the long history, 2,600-year history in most countries in Central Asia, of Jews living there, being welcomed there, living in peace, with no history of anti-Semitism. So it is not inherent in Islamic-Jewish relations that there be these kind of contentious relationships. In fact, as we see the rise of anti-Semitism around the world and in the United States, often with double-digit increases in hate crimes, and the vast majority of hate crimes are directed at Jews. Religious hate crimes are directed at members of the Jewish community and Jewish institutions. We note that the one place in the world where we're seeing a decrease and serious efforts in many countries to address anti-Semitism is in the countries of the Abraham Accords. We've seen the changes in textbooks in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Holocaust commemorations in the UAE, Bahrain, and other countries. We see the changes that led by Morocco, where His Majesty has courageously adopted the Aladdin Project and seen to the restoration of a lot of the historical Jewish sites to remind people, the Muslim population, of the Jewish contributions and the importance of the Jewish community in Morocco. And we see it throughout the Abraham Accord countries that there is a change, and then that is reflected in the polls and studies. The Abraham Accords are, to me, very specifically important. I began more than 30 years ago efforts to reach out to the Gulf because I believed that we have so much more in common, and the problem is that we let outsiders and the negative forces dominate the discussion. And we found that the more we talked, the more we found what we have in common. Just recently, I had a dinner with 6 Muslim ambassadors from 6 of the Central Asian Muslim countries. And as we sat in a very long evening, a most wonderful evening, we found more and more that we have in common, things that we can do together, our common interest in the next generation, and seeing to it that they don't carry on the legacy of hate, which is so destructive, and how much we have to gain from each other, how much they have to gain from a relationship with the State of Israel, addressing many of the critical challenges from water reclamation, energy independence, all the things that Israel has achieved in high tech, which would benefit all of these countries if they were barred from it because of these artificial divisions. That is not to say there aren't political differences. Isn't to say that everybody has to march in lockstep. No, What the Abraham Accords show us, that when we turn the focus on the positive, on what we have in common, not just what divides us, we find how much we can build on that and how we identify the fact that the differences are much less than the things that unite us. That we can work together to the benefit of the people in the region of all faiths, but also for the world at large. It sets an example to many. Perhaps if countries in the world had united against the Nazi threat early on, if they had taken the events of Kristallnacht seriously and had responded to it, then perhaps the outcome would have been very different, not just for the 6 million Jews, but for the tens of millions of others who paid the ultimate price for this hatred. So this year on Kristallnacht, it's a time for us to, again, re-examine where we are, where we have come to, and where we must go. And this is an obligation we have to our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Those who thought that the hatred of anti-Semitism had been defeated or pushed back under the rocks recognize today that this is a cancer. I don't believe you can eradicate it. I do believe that we can isolate the haters, that we can delegitimize them, that we can educate the next generation not to follow their messages of hate, but to pursue the positive messages represented in the Abraham Accords.
Ani Jejurian will now perform Lay Down Your Arms, an Israeli peace song inspired by the words of the ancient prophet Isaiah some 2,500 years ago that foresee a future where the warring enemies in the world, quote, shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they teach their children war anymore.
Dear God, please hear us, listen to our prayer, and let us do thy will upon this earth. Let the children suffer war no more, and let a peaceful world be given birth. Every hand that holds a sword can hold a baby. Every heart can learn to love. Lay down your arms, begin the journey home, and join the human family. The road is long and steep. What we sow, we reap. Children need you. Let us lead you. Promises we make, we all must keep. Inside a soldier lies a dreamer, dreaming of a peaceful world. Lay down your arms, let time heal every wound, and love will someday set us free. And love will someday set us free. And love will someday set us free. And love will someday set us free.
Carl Wilkins is an American Christian missionary and the former head of the Adventist Development and Relief Agency International in Rwanda. In 1994, he was the only American who chose to remain in the country after the Rwandan genocide, rescuing many Tutsi children. We are honored that he has chosen to appear in tonight's program.
31 years ago, my wife and I moved our young children to the center of Africa, to this little nation called Rwanda that was really only known for the mountain gorillas, peaceful little country. We went there to partner with the Rwandan people to build schools and operate clinics. And it was a great place to raise our kids, and we had some amazing experiences in the first 4 years. Then this man-made tragedy struck. In April 6, 1994, the president's plane was shot down, and a small group of extremists used that to launch this extermination campaign, saying that the minority group, the Tutsi, had killed the president. This extermination will soon become known in the history books as the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, where more than 1 million people were killed. Planes shot down Wednesday night. By Friday, the American government is saying we're all evacuating. I mean, we're taking everybody out. Every international organization was doing that. Even the UN, which is a massive tragedy. 2,500 UN soldiers were there. They could have stopped it, but they evacuated. Well, in our house, we had a young lady who lived and worked in our home and loved on our kids, and she was of the minority group. My wife and I went in the bedroom, we talked, we prayed. We're like, we can't just leave this young lady to be tortured and killed, or a young man also who was there in the evening, trapped there as the night watchman, part of the minority group. With those two people, we just thought, the Rwandans give us so much privilege, so much respect. Maybe we could leverage that to help protect these two people. I don't know what we can do we didn't even know the word genocide at that point in the big picture, but the people right here, maybe we can do something. And I look back on that and I think that's probably one of the biggest things in a crisis, is to realize that you really can do something. You can make a difference. You might not, in the big picture, but right in front of us. So my wife took our kids to safety. I stayed. Eventually, I'll start working during the 3 months with Rwandan colleagues to bring food, water, and medicine to groups of orphans around the city. And there was one day where my friend Gasikwa Alize and I showed up at the orphanage with a truckload of barrels of water, and within minutes we were surrounded by about 50 militia guys. They called them Interahamwe. It was 2-3 hour standoff. I don't know why they weren't coming in because I was there. I don't know if it was my connection with, actually, this sounds crazy, with some of the leaders of the genocide in the city. I was working as a humanitarian, had to build relationships with people in power. Not sure why, but they didn't come in. And long story short, I actually ended up asking the real prime minister they killed at the beginning of the genocide. This was like a coup. That the genocidal extremist guy that they put in, Kambanda, I asked him to stop the massacre, which I never would have thought to do if it wasn't for the secretary in this government office, who I'd love to meet someday. But crazy enough, I think he had other ulterior motives, but he stopped the massacre. There were so many times when I partnered with people I never would have imagined that could have done something kind or save a life. And I think that fits in so well with March of the Living, and this idea of light in the darkness. When we believe there's nothing good, we rarely find good. But if we believe something's good, I think you have a better chance of finding it. The genocide ended with the Rwandan Patriotic Front, basically children of refugees who had grown up in other countries, Rwandans, stopping this genocide that the whole world failed to stop. Then it's amazing to stop it, but how do you rebuild it? How do you put pieces together like this? And Rwanda made this bold decision to go restorative instead of punitive, to like with a pyramid, instead of looking for the truth, instead of the truth to blame, we're looking for the truth to understand the harm, and then a repair plan to repair that harm, which includes justice. But the top of the pyramid is healing, and that prioritizing of repair over blame is one of the most important lessons I think we can all learn. One of the things that keeps me going as I travel to schools sharing the stories of Rwanda then and now is our potential to choose repair over blame, to go the direction of restorative and healing thinking, which is really counterintuitive, takes a lot of hard work, but Rwanda gives us a lot of inspiration for that. You know, they have a motto every year that says, remember, unite, renew. And I think that dovetails perfectly with the mission of March for the Living.
The Holocaust is the most extreme example of the use of technology for evil ends, in which science and technology were harnessed and exploited for the mass slaughter of Jews. Jessica Meir is a Jewish astronaut who recently returned from her voyage into space. In her spacecraft, this most advanced example of scientific technology, she humanized her experience by taking with her a postcard from the Holocaust, which she displayed on television from inside her space capsule. Please watch this short but moving account of this important experience.
Hello, my name is Jessica Meir, and I am on a 7-month mission aboard the International Space Station. As a proud woman of Jewish heritage, I personally recommit to the promise, never again. Together, humanity must ensure that the events and meaning of the Holocaust are never forgotten. We must ensure that the memory of the Holocaust remains relevant to our global society. Before traveling to space for my mission, I received this replica of a drawing created by Felix Kasowitz during the Holocaust. He created this postcard in 1944, where he was forced to work for the Hungarian labor service on the Russian front. The message Felix wrote to his son to comfort him is, "You can see that star just the same as me." This postcard is just one of the tens of thousands of works of art in Yad Vashem's art collection. This unique piece of art has particular meaning to me. Just like Peter, Felix's son depicted in the drawing, I too gazed into the heavens and dreamed that one day I would go into space. Just like Peter, I was fascinated by the stars. And from my vantage point aboard the ISS, I can tell you, they are beyond beautiful. To me, the message is clear. 75 years after the end of the Holocaust, those same stars are still seen today by all of humanity. We must all become everlasting witnesses to the past. Together, we can build a better tomorrow for our children.
Cantor Aviva Reisky, a child of a Holocaust survivor, conducted the March of the Living Choir in 2015 in Auschwitz-Birkenau on Yom HaShoah. It is perhaps fitting that the lyrics to the song she is singing, to which she composed the melody, were written by Hannah Senesh, who was executed by the Nazis in November 1944. The song is called "Blessed is the Match," and the words remind us that one spark can kindle many others.
Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame, and blessed is the flame that burns in the heart's secret places, and blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake, and blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. A אשרי הגפרור שנשרף והציל להבות, אשרי הלהבה שבערה בסתרי לבבות, אשרי הלבבות שידעו לחדול בכבוד, אשרי הגפרור שנשרף והציל להבות. Light, 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 Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake, and blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame.
In this evening's program, Let There Be Light, we honored the flame of courage and bravery of so many who inspire us to do better by featuring stories of humanity at its best during the darkest of times. We hope we have inspired you, our viewers, to act courageously and bravely in the face of evil and injustice. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Phyllis Greenberg Heidemann, President of the International March of the Living, who will now conclude tonight's program.
There are stars whose radiance is visible on Earth, although they have long disappeared. There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world, although they are no longer among the living. These lights are particularly bright when the night is dark. They light the way for all humanity. Chana Senesh uttered these beautiful words. In a world searching for hope, we often turn to the wisdom of heroes, both past and present. In the words of Elie Wiesel of blessed memory, a hero is one who stands up to falsehoods and dares to speak the truth. We invite each of you to join Chana Senesh, Elie Wiesel, and the illustrious modern-day heroes from whom you have just heard the truth, and be a hero in your own time by doing all you can do to shine light on the darkness, the destructive darkness of hate. We at the March of the Living thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for turning on your lights, and thank you for participating in this most meaningful Kristallnacht commemoration. We wish you good health, long life, and safety from all harm. Good evening.